The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Airfield as Captain Lisa Chen walked toward the old hangar where she kept her pride and joy. At 58 years old, she moved with the confidence of someone who had spent most of her life in the sky, but lately, that confidence felt harder to maintain around the younger pilots at the airfield. Her boots echoed against the concrete floor as she approached the aircraft that had become both her passion and her burden. The 1943 P-51 Mustang gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its silver body polished to perfection. Every rivet, every panel, every component had been lovingly restored by her own hands over the past 5 years. She ran her fingers along the smooth metal, feeling the history beneath her touch. "Morning, beautiful," she whispered to the plane, the same greeting she'd given it every day for years. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of younger voices approaching. 3 pilots from the commercial flight training school next door were walking past, their conversation carrying clearly in the morning air. "Look at that old thing," one of them said with a laugh. "I can't believe someone actually flies that relic. Belongs in a museum, if you ask me." Another chimed in. "Those old planes are just accidents waiting to happen." Lisa's jaw tightened, but she kept working, checking the oil levels and inspecting the propeller. She'd heard it all before. The comments, the snickers, the barely concealed eye rolls when she taxied past the modern aircraft lined up on the tarmac. The truth was, she understood their skepticism. In a world of glass cockpits, GPS navigation, and computer-controlled everything, her Mustang did look like a dinosaur. No fancy screens, no automated systems, just gauges, switches, and the kind of mechanical reliability that had won a world war. But what they didn't know was the story behind how she'd come to own this particular aircraft. 5 years ago, when she'd finally retired from 35 years of commercial flying. She thought she was done with aviation forever. The airlines had pushed her toward early retirement, subtly suggesting that perhaps it was time to make room for younger pilots. The message was clear. Her experience was valued less than fresh faces and new energy. The retirement party had been awkward. Polite speeches about her long career and dedication to safety, but she could see it in their eyes. Relief. Finally, the old lady was stepping aside. For 6 months, she'd tried to adjust to life on the ground. Golf lessons, cooking classes, volunteer work at the local library. But every time she heard an aircraft overhead, her heart ached. Flying wasn't just her job, it was who she was. That's when she found the Mustang. Hidden away in a barn outside town, covered in dust and slowly deteriorating. The owner was elderly, the son of the original pilot who'd flown her in World War II. He'd kept meaning to restore her, but never found the time. When Lisa saw the plane, something clicked. Here was aircraft with real history, real character. That needed someone who understood what flying truly meant. The purchase took most of her retirement savings. The restoration took 2 years of 12-hour days, learning skills she'd never needed in commercial aviation. Engine rebuilding, fabric work, paint and polish until her hands were permanently stained with grease and primer. Now, every morning, she came to the hangar before dawn. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The Mustang had given her purpose again, a reason to wake up excited about the day ahead. The younger pilots at Riverside didn't see any of that history. They saw an old woman playing with an old toy. When she'd first started flying from their field, the airport manager had been welcoming enough, but she could sense the tolerance rather than genuine acceptance. Her monthly hangar fees were paid on time, her insurance was current, and her aircraft was impeccably maintained. But she was still the odd one out. During the weekly pilot meetings, conversations would stop when she entered the room. Not out of respect, but out of uncertainty about what to say to someone who seemed to belong to a different era of aviation. They talked about new regulations, modern equipment upgrades, and career opportunities that assumed everyone was decades younger than her. "Mrs. Chen," the airport manager had said just last week, "we're getting some complaints about noise from your aircraft during practice flights." The complaint was thinly veiled criticism. The Mustang's Merlin engine was louder than modern planes. but it was well within legal limits and she always followed proper procedures. The real message was clear: you're different, and different makes people uncomfortable. But Lisa had something they didn't understand. Every rivet in her aircraft had been placed by hand. Every system had been tested and retested until she knew exactly how it would respond in any situation. While modern pilots relied on computers to tell them what their aircraft was doing, she could feel it through her hands and feet, hear it in the engine's rhythm, sense it in the way the controls responded to her touch. She'd logged over 20,000 flight hours in everything from small trainers to jumbo jets. She'd flown through thunderstorms that would ground modern flights, landed on runways that barely deserved the name, and dealt with emergencies that today's pilots only read about in textbooks, yet none of that seemed to matter here. Age had made her invisible in the aviation community, and her choice to fly a vintage aircraft had made her an oddity. The combination meant she was often overlooked, dismissed, or treated like a hobbyist rather than a serious pilot. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, Lisa heard footsteps approaching. Tom Rodriguez, one of the flight instructors, walked over with his morning coffee. Unlike the younger pilots, Tom was closer to her age and had always been respectful. "Beautiful morning for flying," he said, admiring the Mustang's lines. "Every morning's beautiful for flying," Lisa replied, checking the fuel levels. "You know," Tom said quietly, "some of these young guys don't know what they're talking about. That's a serious aircraft you've got there." Lisa appreciated the support, but she didn't need validation. She knew what her aircraft could do. She knew what she could do. The question was whether anyone else would ever give her the chance to prove it. As she climbed into the cockpit and began her engine start procedure, the familiar sounds and vibrations filled her with the same excitement she'd felt on her first solo flight 40 years ago. The Mustang roared to life, its powerful engine settling into a steady rumble that she felt in her bones. Taxiing past the newer aircraft, she caught sight of several pilots watching from the flight school building. Some were shaking their heads, others were pointing and talking. Let them talk, she thought. This old museum piece and its aging pilot were about to show them what real flying looked like. Little did any of them know that very soon, this relic and the woman they'd dismissed would be called upon to accomplish something none of their modern aircraft could achieve. The alarm started blaring at 4:47 a.m. on what should have been a quiet Tuesday morning. At the Sierra Nevada Emergency Response Center, dispatcher Jenny Park jumped from her chair as the radio crackled to life with urgent voices from the mountains. "Mayday. Mayday, this is Research Team Alpha." The voice was strained, filled with panic. "We're trapped in Devil's Canyon. The fire has us surrounded. We need immediate evacuation." Dr. Michael Torres, the team leader, had been conducting geological surveys with his 5-person crew in one of the most remote areas of the Sierra Nevada. They were studying rock formations that could only be accessed by hiking deep into the wilderness, far from any roads or easy escape routes. What started as a routine 3-day expedition had turned into a nightmare when a lightning strike ignited dry brush 20 miles away. The fire had spread faster than anyone thought possible. Driven by hot, dry winds and fueled by years of drought-dead vegetation, it had jumped from ridge to ridge, cutting off every escape route the research team had planned to use. Now they were trapped on a small rocky ledge halfway down Devil's Canyon, with walls of flame advancing from 3 directions. "How many people do we have?" Emergency Coordinator Rita Valdez asked as she rushed into the command center, still pulling on her jacket. "6 researchers," Jenny replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up topographical maps. "They've got maybe 12 hours of water left and the fire is moving toward their position fast." Rita studied the satellite images on the main screen. Devil's Canyon was a geological nightmare even in good conditions. The canyon walls dropped nearly straight down for 800 feet, with rocky outcroppings and unpredictable wind patterns that made it one of the most dangerous flying areas in the entire mountain range. Adding a massive wildfire to the equation made it seem impossible. "Get me helicopter rescue on the line," Rita ordered, "and contact the Forest Service. We need every available aircraft." Within an hour, the first rescue helicopter arrived at the staging area. Captain Rodriguez, a veteran pilot with 15 years of mountain rescue experience, studied the aerial photos with growing concern. "I've flown into Devil's Canyon before," he told Rita. Even in perfect weather, it's tricky. The walls create wind shears that can flip an aircraft in seconds. Add the heat and smoke from this fire and he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications, but they had to try. The research team's radio calls were becoming more desperate by the hour. The temperature on their ledge was climbing as the fire drew closer, and their limited water supply wouldn't last much longer in the intense heat. The first rescue attempt launched at 10:30 a.m. Rodriguez approached the canyon carefully, using his helicopter's powerful searchlight to cut through the thick smoke. But as soon as he entered the narrow confines of the canyon, violent updrafts from the fire grabbed his aircraft like an invisible hand. "I'm getting massive downdrafts," his voice crackled over the radio. "The smoke is too thick, I can't see the canyon walls." Suddenly, his helicopter lurched sideways, missing the rocky wall by mere feet. "Aborting approach," Rodriguez called out, his voice tight with concentration. "It's not safe. I nearly hit the wall." The second attempt came from a different angle, with a newer helicopter equipped with advanced navigation systems. But the intense heat from the fire was creating electromagnetic interference that scrambled the aircraft's sophisticated electronics. Pilot Jennifer Walsh found herself flying blind, her GPS spinning wildly and her instruments giving contradictory readings. "The heat signature is overwhelming all my sensors," she reported. "I can't distinguish between the canyon walls and the fire. My navigation system just crashed." She too was forced to retreat when a sudden wind shear nearly sent her into the canyon floor. By 2 p.m., the situation was becoming desperate. Weather reports showed a massive storm system approaching from the west, bringing winds that would make any rescue impossible for at least 3 days. The research team's water was running critically low, and the advancing fire had cut off their last potential escape route on foot. Dr. Torres's voice came over the radio, weaker now, but still determined. "We can see the flames getting closer, maybe 2 hours before they reach our position. The heat is getting unbearable." Rita stared at the map spread across the command table, her mind racing through options that all seemed impossible. Traditional rescue methods weren't working. The canyon was too narrow for large helicopters, too unpredictable for precision flying, and too dangerous for ground crews to reach. "What about military aircraft?" someone suggested. "Maybe they've got something that can handle these conditions." "Already tried," Rita replied. "The nearest military base is 4 hours away, and they don't have anything better equipped for this terrain than what we've already used." The third rescue attempt came at 3:45 p.m., this time with a smaller, more maneuverable helicopter. Pilot Kevin Park thought he could use his aircraft's size advantage to navigate the tight spaces, but as he descended into the canyon, the combination of heat, smoke, and unpredictable winds proved too much even for his nimble aircraft. "I'm getting hammered by crosswinds," he radioed. "The thermal currents from the fire are creating wind, patterns I've never seen before. It's like trying to fly through a tornado." A sudden downdraft slammed his helicopter toward the canyon floor. Only his quick reflexes and years of experience saved him from disaster. "I'm pulling out," he announced. "This is beyond what any helicopter can handle." As the afternoon wore on, the mood in the command center grew darker. Every conventional rescue method had failed. The research team's radio calls were becoming weaker, and smoke was making it harder for them to breathe even on their small ledge. "There has to be something we're not thinking of," Rita said, pacing in front of the maps. "Some kind of aircraft that can handle these conditions." "The problem is all the modern systems," explained Captain Rodriguez. "The electronics get scrambled by the fire's electromagnetic field. The heat overwhelms the sensors, and the wind patterns in that canyon are impossible to predict with any computer model. So we need something simpler," Jenny suggested. "Something that doesn't rely on all those electronic systems." "Like what?" Rita asked. "A hang glider?" The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the impossible situation. 6 people were trapped in an inferno, and all of modern aviation's most advanced aircraft had failed to reach them. Time was running out, the weather was getting worse, and conventional wisdom said there was nothing more they could do. Outside the command center, news crews were setting up their equipment. The story of the trapped researchers was spreading across social media. with thousands of people following the rescue attempts in real time. Family members of the research team had arrived at the staging area, their faces showing the strain of watching failed rescue attempt after failed rescue attempt. As the sun began to set behind the smoke-filled sky, Rita Valdez found herself staring at the topographical maps one more time, hoping to find some miracle solution that everyone else had missed. Somewhere out there, 6 people were counting on her to find a way to save them before the advancing flames made rescue impossible forever. Lisa Chen had been following the rescue attempts on her radio all afternoon. As a pilot, she always monitored emergency frequencies, but today the desperate voices from Devil's Canyon had kept her glued to her hangar radio. Each failed rescue attempt made her heart sink deeper. She knew Devil's Canyon well. 20 years ago, when she was still flying commercial routes, she'd flown over it countless times. The narrow walls, the unpredictable winds, the way heat rose from the canyon floor in dangerous thermals. Most pilots gave it a wide berth even in perfect weather. But as she listened to the latest failed rescue attempt, something clicked in her mind. The rescue coordinator kept mentioning the same problems: electronic systems failing, GPS going haywire, heat sensors being overwhelmed, computer navigation systems crashing. All the sophisticated technology that modern aircraft relied on was useless in this situation. Her P-51 Mustang didn't have any of those problems because it didn't have any of those systems. Lisa walked over to her aircraft, running her hand along the smooth metal fuselage. The Mustang had been built in an era when pilots flew by sight, sound, and feel. No computers, no GPS, no electronic navigation aids. Just a pilot, an aircraft, and the skills to handle whatever nature threw at them. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The canyon was too narrow for helicopters, but a fighter plane could slip through spaces that would be impossible for larger aircraft. The Mustang's simple mechanical systems wouldn't be affected by electromagnetic interference from the fire, and she had something none of the younger pilots possessed: experience flying in conditions that would terrify most modern aviators. But would they even listen to her? She was just the old woman with the museum-piece aircraft that everyone dismissed. Still, 6 people were trapped and dying, and she might be their only hope. Lisa grabbed her flight jacket and headed for her truck. The emergency staging area was 20 minutes away, and she could see the smoke column rising above the mountains like a dark pillar against the evening sky. When she arrived at the staging area, chaos greeted her. News vans lined the access road, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Family members of the trapped researchers huddled in small groups, their faces etched with worry. Emergency vehicles were everywhere, their lights flashing in the growing darkness. Lisa made her way to the command trailer, where she could see people clustered around maps and radio equipment. Through the window, she recognized emergency coordinator Rita Valdez from news reports over the years. Rita was pointing at a map, her face grim as she spoke with several pilots who had attempted the rescue. Taking a deep breath, Lisa knocked on the trailer door. A young man in uniform opened it, looking harried and exhausted. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area," he said. "Family members need to wait in the designated area." "I'm not family," Lisa replied. "I'm a pilot. I think I might be able to help." "Oh," young man looked skeptical. "Are you with one of the rescue services?" "No, but I've been listening to the radio traffic. I know what's happening in that canyon." Rita Valdez looked up from the maps, her eyes showing the strain of the day's failed attempts. "I'm sorry, but we're only working with certified rescue personnel right now." Lisa stepped into the trailer, ignoring the surprised looks from the assembled rescue team. "My name is Lisa Chen. I'm a retired commercial pilot with over 20,000 flight hours. I've been flying for 35 years, and I think I know why your rescues are failing." "Ma'am, we appreciate your concern," Rita said, her voice showing barely controlled frustration. "But we have the best pilots and most advanced aircraft available working on this." "That's exactly the problem," Lisa replied. "Your advanced aircraft are too advanced for this situation." The trailer fell silent. Captain Rodriguez, who had led the first failed rescue attempt, looked up from his radio. "What do you mean?" Lisa moved to the map table, pointing to Devil's Canyon. Every pilot who's tried to get in there has had the same problems. Electronics failing, GPS going crazy, heat sensors overloaded. You're trying to fly sophisticated aircraft into conditions they weren't designed for. So what do you suggest? Rita asked, her tone suggesting she was humoring an old woman rather than seriously considering her input. I suggest using an aircraft that doesn't rely on any of those systems, Lisa said. Something that was built to fly in extreme conditions, with nothing but mechanical controls and pilot skill. Captain Rodriguez frowned. What kind of aircraft are you talking about? Everything we have is modern equipment. Lisa took a breath, knowing how her next words would sound. I have a 1943 P-51 Mustang, fully restored, completely airworthy, and equipped with exactly the kind of simple systems that might work in that canyon. The silence in the trailer was deafening. Then someone snorted with laughter. A World War II fighter plane? You're not serious. I'm completely serious, Lisa replied. That aircraft was designed to fly in combat conditions that make your canyon look easy. No computers to crash, no GPS to fail, no electronic sensors to overload. Just proven mechanical systems and a pilot who knows how to use them. Rita shook her head. Even if that made sense, we can't just let civilian aircraft into an active rescue zone. There are regulations, insurance issues, liability concerns. People are dying, Lisa said, her voice quiet but firm. 6 researchers are trapped in that canyon with a wildfire bearing down on them. Your regulations won't matter much if they're dead. Captain Rodriguez studied the map thoughtfully. Even if the aircraft could handle the conditions, the approach would be incredibly dangerous. The canyon walls are less than 100 feet apart in some places. The slightest miscalculation— I know the risks, Lisa interrupted. I've been flying for longer than most of you have been alive. I've handled aircraft in conditions that would ground everything you've got parked out there. This is insane, another pilot said. You're talking about flying a 70-year-old aircraft into a fire zone to attempt a rescue that modern helicopters can't accomplish. Lisa turned to face him. Those modern helicopters have tried 3 times and failed 3 times. Every failure brings those people closer to death. Sometimes old-fashioned methods work when high-tech solutions don't. Rita looked at the clock on the wall. It was past 6 p.m., and the trapped researchers had been without adequate water for hours. The fire was advancing, and the approaching storm system would make any rescue impossible by morning. Even if we considered this, Rita said slowly, how would you actually get the people out? The Mustang is a single-seat fighter plane. I've thought about that, Lisa replied. The P-51 can be modified. Remove some internal equipment. Add a basic passenger seat. It's been done before in emergency situations. The aircraft is strong enough to handle the extra weight. How long would these modifications take? Rodriguez asked. A few hours if I had help from some good mechanics. The real question is whether you're willing to try something unconventional while there's still time. The trailer erupted in discussion. Some voices were skeptical, others desperate enough to consider any option. Lisa stood quietly, watching Rita Valdez weigh the impossible decision. Outside, the family members of the trapped researchers waited for news. The fire continued its relentless advance toward Devil's Canyon, and somewhere in the mountains, 6 people clung to life on a rocky ledge, hoping someone would find a way to reach them before it was too late. Finally, Rita looked up from the maps. If we do this, it would be completely unofficial. No government authorization, no insurance coverage, no backup if something goes wrong. I understand, Lisa said, but sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks that officials can't officially approve. The room fell silent again as everyone contemplated the desperate proposal. A vintage fighter plane, an aging pilot, and a rescue mission that defied every modern protocol. It sounded like madness, but madness might be their only remaining option. At 3:30 a.m., Lisa stood in her hangar surrounded by 3 volunteer mechanics who had worked through the night to modify her P-51 Mustang. They had removed non-essential equipment from behind the pilot's seat and installed a basic passenger restraint system that could accommodate 1 person at a time. The modifications were crude but functional, designed for emergency evacuation rather than comfort. It's not pretty, but it'll hold, said Jake Martinez, the lead mechanic who had volunteered despite his supervisor's objections. The weight distribution is good, and the aircraft can handle the extra load. Lisa ran her hands over the modifications one final time. Every bolt had been torqued to specification, every strap tested and retested. In a few hours, she would be asking this 70-year-old fighter plane to perform beyond anything it was originally designed for. The radio crackled with the latest update from the trapped research team. Dr. Torres' voice was noticeably weaker than it had been 12 hours earlier. Water's almost gone. The heat is getting worse. We can see flames on the ridge above us now. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, but instead of bringing hope, the morning light revealed the true scope of the disaster. The fire had grown during the night, and thick black smoke now covered the entire canyon system. Weather reports confirmed that the approaching storm would bring dangerous winds by noon, making any rescue attempt impossible for days. Lisa walked out to where her Mustang sat on the tarmac, its silver paint gleaming in the early morning light. She had flown this aircraft through countless practice flights, aerobatic displays, and pleasure cruises, but never into combat. Today, she was asking it to become what it was originally built to be, a machine capable of flying into impossible situations and bringing people home. Emergency Coordinator Rita Valdez approached, looking like she hadn't slept all night. "The families want to thank you for trying," she said quietly. "Whatever happens up there, you're giving those people their only chance." Lisa nodded, checking her flight suit and helmet one more time. She had chosen her oldest equipment gear that had seen her through thousands of hours of flying in all kinds of conditions. No fancy electronics, no heads-up displays, just basic instruments and the kind of reliable equipment that had kept pilots alive for decades. "Remember," Rita continued, "the ledge where they're trapped is barely 20 feet wide. You'll have to hover the aircraft while they climb in, one at a time. The canyon walls are less than 100 feet apart, and the wind conditions are completely unpredictable." "I understand," Lisa replied, though privately she wondered if anyone could truly understand what she was about to attempt. Flying a single-engine fighter plane into a narrow canyon, filled with superheated air, toxic smoke, and winds that had already defeated 3 modern helicopters, seemed beyond the realm of possibility. At 6:15 a.m., Lisa climbed into the cockpit of her Mustang. The familiar surroundings were comforting: the worn leather seat that had molded to her body over years of flying, the control stick that responded to her slightest touch, the instrument panel she could read in the dark. This was her domain, the place where age and gender meant nothing compared to skill and experience. The Merlin engine roared to life, its powerful rumble echoing across the airfield. Lisa ran through her pre-flight checks with methodical precision, testing every system twice. Engine temperature normal, oil pressure good, fuel tanks full, controls responding properly. Everything looked perfect, but she knew conditions in the canyon would test every component beyond its normal limits. As she taxied toward the runway, Lisa saw dozens of people gathered to watch her departure. Rescue workers, news crews, family, members of the trapped researchers, and even some of the younger pilots who had dismissed her aircraft as a museum piece. Their faces showed a mixture of hope, skepticism, and fear. Taking off, Lisa pointed the Mustang toward the mountains where a column of smoke rose thousands of feet into the sky. The flight to Devil's Canyon would take 20 minutes in normal conditions, but these weren't normal conditions. She would have to navigate through smoke, around other aircraft fighting the fire, and into terrain that challenged even the most experienced mountain pilots. As she climbed toward the mountains, Lisa could see the scope of the wildfire for the first time. It covered dozens of square miles with fingers of flame reaching in every direction. The heat was so intense it was creating its own weather system, with towering thunderheads and unpredictable wind patterns that made flight planning impossible. 15 minutes into the flight, she encountered her first real challenge. A massive smoke plume forced her to climb higher than planned, using more fuel than she had calculated. The Mustang's engine worked harder in the thin air, and she could feel the aircraft struggling against the superheated updrafts rising from the fire below. "Mustang November 74 Alpha, this is Fire Command," her radio crackled. "You're approaching restricted airspace. What are your intentions?" "Fire Command, This is the emergency rescue attempt we discussed, proceeding to Devil's Canyon for personnel evacuation. There was a pause. November 7, 4th. Alpha, be advised we have tanker aircraft operating in that area. Exercise extreme caution. Lisa acknowledged the warning, knowing that her small fighter plane would be nearly invisible to the pilots of the massive air tankers dropping fire retardant. She would have to stay alert for aircraft that outweighed her by tens of thousands of pounds and couldn't maneuver quickly enough to avoid a collision. As she approached Devil's Canyon, the conditions became truly extreme. The smoke was so thick, she could barely see her wingtips, and the heat was causing violent updrafts that threw the Mustang around like a toy. Her simple mechanical instruments were working perfectly, but the view outside was like flying through hell itself. Research Team Alpha, this is your rescue aircraft, Lisa radioed. I'm approaching your position. Can you see or hear me? We can hear you, Dr. Torres's voice came back, filled with desperate hope. We can't see anything through the smoke, but you sound close. Lisa began her descent into the canyon, flying purely by instrument and instinct. The canyon walls were invisible in the smoke, but she could feel them pressing in on both sides. The Mustang bucked and rolled as conflicting air currents hit it from every direction, and the heat from the fire below was so intense, it felt like flying over an open furnace. At 800 feet above the canyon floor, she broke through the worst of the smoke and caught her first glimpse of the trapped researchers. 6 tiny figures huddled on a ledge that looked impossibly small from the air, surrounded by walls of rock and advancing flames. The approach would require precision flying that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. The ledge was barely wide enough for the researchers to stand on, let alone for an aircraft to maneuver near. Lisa would have to bring the Mustang into a hover just feet from the canyon wall, hold it steady in impossible wind conditions, and somehow allow, terrified, exhausted people to climb into her aircraft. Banking into her first approach, Lisa felt the full force of the canyon's treacherous wind patterns. Downdrafts slammed the Mustang toward the rocks below, while crosswinds tried to push it into the canyon walls. The simple controls of the vintage fighter responded instantly to her inputs, allowing her to dance between the deadly obstacles with a precision that no computer-controlled aircraft could match. This was it. Everything she had learned in 4 decades of flying would be tested in the next few minutes. 6 lives depended on her ability to accomplish what everyone said was impossible. Lisa's first approach to the ledge was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. The canyon wall seemed to close in around her Mustang as she descended through the smoke, fighting wind currents that changed direction every few seconds. She could see the 6 researchers clearly now, their faces turned upward with desperate hope. I'm coming in from the east, she radioed to Dr. Torres. When I give the signal, the first person needs to move quickly. I can only hold position for about 30 seconds at a time. The ledge was even smaller than it had appeared from above. Barely 15 feet wide and maybe 6 feet deep, it looked like a tiny shelf carved into the massive canyon wall. The researchers had pressed themselves against the rock face, trying to stay as far as possible from the edge where Lisa would have to position her aircraft. Bringing the Mustang into a hover just 5 feet from the ledge, Lisa felt every muscle in her body strain against the controls. The vintage fighter plane wasn't designed for hovering like a helicopter, but its responsive controls and powerful engine allowed her to maintain an unstable equilibrium in the chaotic air currents. Now, she shouted over the radio. Dr. Torres, as the team leader, had insisted on going last. The first researcher, a young woman named Kate, scrambled toward the aircraft. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but she moved with determination, born of desperation. Lisa held the Mustang steady as Kate climbed into the cramped passenger space behind the pilot's seat. The aircraft lurched as Kate's weight upset the carefully calculated balance, but Lisa compensated instantly. With her passenger secured, she pulled away from the ledge and began the treacherous climb out of the canyon. The trip back to the staging area was a nightmare of smoke, heat, and turbulence. Kate had never been in a small aircraft before, let alone a World War II fighter plane flying through a wildfire. She gripped the safety harness with white knuckles, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. Landing at the staging area, Lisa was greeted by cheers from the assembled crowd, but there was no time for celebration. 5 people were still trapped, the fire was advancing, and her fuel was running low. The refueling and passenger exchange took exactly 12 minutes. As Kate was helped from the aircraft by paramedics, Lisa was already running through her pre-flight checks for the second trip. The Mustang's engine was running hot from the extreme conditions, but all the systems were still functioning perfectly. The second rescue was even more dangerous than the first. The wind patterns in the canyon had changed as the fire grew closer, creating violent downdrafts that slammed the Mustang toward the canyon floor. Lisa fought the controls with everything she had, sweat pouring down her face despite the air conditioning, in her flight suit. This time she retrieved David, the team's youngest member, who was barely conscious from heat exhaustion. Getting him into the aircraft took longer than planned, and Lisa could feel the Mustang's engine temperature climbing dangerously high in the superheated air. The third trip tested both pilot and aircraft beyond their limits. The fire had reached the top of the canyon wall directly above the trapped researchers, and burning debris was falling like rain. Lisa had to dodge falling rocks and flaming branches while maintaining the precise positioning needed to reach the ledge. Amy, the team's photographer, was so terrified she froze when it came time to climb into the aircraft. "I can't," she sobbed. "I'm afraid of heights." "You're more afraid of fire," Dr. Torres shouted over the roar of flames above them. "Go now." It took precious extra seconds to get Amy into the passenger seat, seconds during which Lisa fought to keep the Mustang from being blown into the canyon wall by increasingly violent wind gusts. The aircraft was taking a beating from the extreme conditions, and she could hear unusual sounds from the engine that suggested it was operating well beyond its design limits. By the fourth trip, Lisa was running on pure adrenaline and decades of flying experience. Her fuel gauge showed dangerously low levels, and the Mustang's engine was running so hot that she worried it might seize up entirely. But James, the team's geologist, climbed aboard without hesitation, and they made it out of the canyon just as a massive piece of burning tree crashed onto the ledge where he had been standing moments before. The fifth rescue was the most harrowing yet. Only 2 people remained: Dr. Torres and Rachel, the team's communication specialist. The fire had completely surrounded their position now, and the heat was so intense that Lisa could feel it through the Mustang's metal skin. Rachel was injured, her leg twisted from a fall earlier in the day. Getting her into the aircraft required help from Dr. Torres, who refused to leave until his entire team was safe. As Lisa struggled to hold position in winds that were now gusting over 60 miles per hour, Torres literally carried Rachel to the aircraft and helped her climb in. "One more trip," Lisa radioed to the staging area. Just Dr. Torres left, but when she returned for the final rescue, she found a situation that nearly broke her heart. Dr. Torres was unconscious, overcome by smoke inhalation and heat exhaustion. He was lying on the ledge, and the fire was now visible in 3 directions around their position. Landing the Mustang was impossible with an unconscious passenger who couldn't help himself. Lisa would have to get out of her aircraft, physically carry Torres to the plane, and somehow get both of them back into the cockpit while the aircraft sat unattended on the narrow ledge. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever attempted in 4 decades of flying. Shutting down the engine, Lisa climbed out of the cockpit and ran to where Torres lay motionless. The heat was overwhelming, like standing next to an open blast furnace. Smoke burned her eyes and throat, making it almost impossible to breathe. Torres was a big man, and dead weight was harder to move than a conscious person. Lisa dragged him toward the aircraft, her strength failing as the extreme conditions took their toll. For a moment, she thought she wouldn't be able to get him into the plane, but then she thought about his family waiting at the staging area, about the 5 people she had already saved, about proving that experience and determination could overcome any obstacle. With a final surge of adrenaline, she managed to get Torres into the passenger seat and secure his safety harness. Starting the engine took 3 tries. The Mustang was as exhausted as its pilot, but the old fighter plane had 1 more flight left in it. As they climbed out of Devil's Canyon for the last time, Lisa could see in her mirrors that the ledge where they had been standing was now completely engulfed in flames. Landing at the staging area, Lisa was barely conscious herself. The Crowd that had gathered was enormous now, with news crews broadcasting the rescue live to millions of viewers around the world. As she shut down the engine and climbed out of the cockpit, the assembled crowd erupted in applause that echoed across the entire airfield. Emergency medical personnel rushed to help Dr. Torres, who was already showing signs of recovery. Lisa stood beside her Mustang, still wearing her flight suit and helmet, looking at the aircraft that had just accomplished the impossible. Rita Valdez approached with tears in her eyes. 6 people, she said simply. You saved 6 people with an aircraft everyone said belonged in a museum. In the days that followed, Lisa's story spread around the world. Aviation magazines featured her on their covers. She was invited to speak at conferences and air shows. The same pilots who had once dismissed her now approached with respect and admiration. But the moment that meant the most came a week later, when Dr. Torres and his entire research team came to her hangar to thank her personally. They stood around her P-51 Mustang, no longer seeing an old aircraft but the machine that had saved their lives. They called it a museum piece, Dr. Torres said, running his hand along the Mustang's propeller. But museums preserve things that are important, things that matter, things that made a difference. Lisa smiled, looking at her aircraft with new appreciation. It was still the same plane it had always been, but now the world saw it differently. Sometimes it takes extraordinary circumstances to reveal the true value of things that others have overlooked.